Welcome back to All Things Soggy Buns. We're going to dive deep today into perfectly smoked steak. And you know Soggy Buns, we're a food truck and catering service here in Maryland, and we're all about delicious food, and we know you are too. And we're excited to kind of break it down with you and figure out what are the secrets here? How can you elevate your steak game? Our mission today is to extract the key steps and techniques to getting tender, juicy, and incredibly flavorful steak. I mean, maybe the best steak you've ever had.
You know, what's interesting is that Toby, the author here, he's pretty convinced that smoking steak is just superior to traditional grilling. And he advocates for a specific method, starting low and slow with smoke, and then finishing with a high heat sear. And the beauty of this approach is that, well, the lower temperature allows the steak to really soak up all that smoky goodness without drying out. Then the sear, creates this nice crust that locks in the juices. So it's really about maximizing flavor and the texture of the steak.
Okay, so I want to talk about this whole smoking is better thing. So I feel like I've heard that from a lot of people. Once you taste a properly smoked steak, might just leave grilling behind.
Yeah.
Because that smoky infusion becomes, such an integral part of the flavor profile. Now, Toby mentions a preference for thick-cut ribeyes, and maybe from, a place like Ola's Club or something. But what's great is it doesn't have to be ribeye. The article emphasizes that you can do this with pretty much any cut, whether you're a fan of flank steak or strip steak, flat iron steak, even filet mignon. Smoking can work wonders.
And building on that, Toby mentions a very important thing, and it's the thickness of the steak, more than the weight, when you're trying to figure out, like, cooking times. Because thicker steak can retain moisture during that initial smoking phase, so that means you can add more smoke flavor without drying it out.
All right, now let's talk about equipment. I mean, we need a smoker, right? So Toby mentioned some excellent options. Pellet smokers are very user-friendly, and especially if you want consistent temperatures and great smoke flavor, without having to constantly fuss over it, it's a good option because it takes care of that consistent smoke flavor without the need to manage the firebox all the time.
Right, and pellet smokers, they offer that user-friendliness and temperature stability, which is, it's a big advantage, especially if you're just getting into smoking. However, traditional offset smokers like the Oklahoma Joe smoker, they're still great if you really enjoy, a more hands-on approach. Controlling your fire, controlling your smoke.
And speaking of smoke, what kind of wood should we use? Well, according to Toby, you can't go wrong with oak or hickory. For smoking steak, mesquite's another great option, known for, very bold and kind of distinctive flavor, and pairs particularly well with beef. And for pellet grill users, Toby recommends a competition blend of pellets. It's a mixture of different hardwoods, so you get a well-rounded smoke profile.
Yeah, and the choice of wood really adds a level of personalization to your steak, because oak, it offers a medium smoke flavor, very appealing, but then hickory brings something stronger, almost like a bacony flavor, and mesquite, it's got that powerful earthy flavor. So experimenting with different woods can be fun. It can lead to some interesting results.
Okay, so we've got our steak, we've got our smoker. What about seasoning? Well, Toby keeps it pretty simple. Just salt and pepper. The idea is to let the natural flavors of the steak and the smoke just come through.
Yeah.
But he also says if you have, a go-to steak seasoning, feel free. Don't be shy. Use it. I think the key here is to not, overcomplicate it and let those high-quality ingredients be the star. Oh, and very important, after you season it, let it rest for like 30 minutes before it goes in the smoker.
Yeah, that rest is important after seasoning, because that's when the salt really penetrates the surface of the meat, and it draws out some moisture, which then dissolves the salt. And it basically creates a natural brine, and that helps to season the steak more deeply, and it can contribute to a better sear later on.
Okay, let's get into the smoking process, the initial smoking process. Toby outlines this low and slow method, and he's very specific about it. You preheat your smoker to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you put those seasoned steaks directly on the rack. Let them smoke for 20 minutes without flipping. And he's very specific about his timing because he says if you smoke for too long at this low temperature, it can dry out the steak and make it tough. So this initial stage is about infusing the smoke flavor. You're not trying to fully cook it through just yet.
Right. That initial 20 minutes is all about that smoke getting absorbed without really raising the internal temperature too much. It's a gentle process. And by not flipping it, you ensure that one side gets even exposure to that smoke before you move on. Searing.
Okay, so after that 20-minute smoke session, what's next? It's time for the reverse sear. So you take the steaks out, you tent them loosely with foil to keep them warm, and then crank up that smoker temperature to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Now things are getting exciting.
It's a clever technique that reverse sear, because you're smoking it first at a low temperature, so that infuses the smoke flavor deep into the meat, and then you hit it with that high heat sear, and you get this amazing crust on the outside, while the inside stays perfectly cooked and juicy. So you get the best of both worlds in terms of, the texture and the taste.
Okay, so Toby talks about two scenarios for searing. One, if you have searing racks in your smoker, and two, if you don't. So if your smoker does have those searing racks, the ones with the ridges, you're going to want to put them in there as the smoker's heating up. They get much hotter than the regular grates, and they're designed to create those nice crosshatch grill marks.
Right, and those searing racks, they're great because you get those grill marks, but you also get a good sear because those ridges, they make direct contact with the steak and concentrate the heat in those areas, and that's how you get those lines.
But what if you don't have searing racks? No problem. You can just keep cooking it on the regular rack. You might not get those grill marks, but you will still get a delicious sear. Or you can sear it at the end on a separate heat source, like a gas grill, charcoal grill, or even on the open flame, if your smoker has one.
The important thing is the sear, Whether you're doing it in the smoker with a rack or separately on something else, the goal is to cook that outside quickly at high heat after that initial, on slow smoke.
Okay, once the smoker hits 450, it's time to put the steaks back in. Toby recommends grilling for about 5 to 9 minutes per side. But here's a crucial point. The exact cooking time really depends on how thick the steak is. You should always cook to the internal temperature you want, not just to a set time. He gives a starting point of 5 minutes per side for ribeyes of, average thickness.
Yeah, that 5 to 9 minutes, it's really just a guideline. The best way to ensure you get it cooked exactly how you like it is to use a thermometer. An instant read thermometer. Because remember, different thicknesses will require different searing times, even if you want the same internal temperature.
And speaking of internal temperature, that's the key, right? To a perfectly cooked steak. Toby highly recommends using a thermometer to check for doneness. And here's a tip. Take the steak off the heat when it's about 3 to 5 degrees below your desired final temperature. Because of carryover cooking, it's going to keep cooking even after you take it off. And while specific temperature ranges aren't in this particular excerpt, Toby does say that medium doneness is a great target if you're unsure.
Right. That carryover cooking is so important to keep in mind, because if you wait till it hits the exact temperature on the smoker, it's going to be overcooked by the time it rests. So taking it off a few degrees early accounts for that.
Now, if you didn't use searing racks in your smoker, Toby says you should cook the steak during the smoking phase to a temperature that's about 10 degrees below your target, and then sear both sides on high heat. So that could be a gas grill, charcoal grill, or that open flame setting. This way you still get that smoky flavor throughout the steak without overcooking it during the sear.
Right. It's just a slightly different approach. If you don't have those searing racks, you just kind of adjust the timing of when you sear. But the goal is the same, a flavorful, juicy steak with a nice crust on the outside.
Okay. You've smoked it. You've seared it. What's the last step before you can actually eat this beautiful creation? Rest. Toby emphasizes this so much. Let your steak rest for 10 minutes before slicing into it. This gives those juices which have been pushed to the center by the heat time to redistribute throughout the meat. If you skip the resting period, all that juice is going to run out when you cut it, and you'll end up with the dry steak. And nobody wants that. So don't skip the rest.
It's funny, resting is so important, but people rush it. During cooking, that heat makes the muscle fibers tighten up, and they squeeze out moisture towards the center. So resting gives those fibers time to relax and reabsorb the juices. And that's how you get a more tender, succulent steak.
Now, a great steak deserves some great sides, right? And Toby has some great suggestions. Mashed potatoes, of course, Hasselback smoked potatoes, buttery smoked corn, grilled asparagus, all delicious options. And soggy buns here in Maryland, we offer some amazing sides that would go perfectly with a smoked steak.
Yeah.
So keep this in mind. You can check out our menu at soggybuns.com.
Yeah, those sides, they really do sound like they complement the steak well. I mean,
Yeah.
You've got those creamy mashed potatoes and the Hasselback potatoes with that crispy texture, the sweetness of the corn, all very nice pairings.
Now, Toby also includes a helpful FAQ section in the article, which is great. One question is about prime versus choice steak. Prime steak, it has more of that intramuscular fat, the marbling, and that makes it more tender, more flavorful, but also more expensive than choice.
Yeah, it's helpful to understand the USDA grading system for beef, because it helps you make choices based on what you're looking for and your budget. So prime has the most marbling.
Another common question is, how long do you cook a steak? And Toby's answer, which he says throughout the article, is cook to temperature, not time. However, as a general guideline, if you're grilling at around 425 degrees, it might take 6 to 9 minutes per side. But again, thermometer is your best friend.
Yeah, that's 6 to 9 minutes. That's a rough estimate. So many factors at play. How thick the steak is, the actual temperature of your grill. So the internal temperature is what you want to focus on.
And last question in the FAQ. Should you keep the lid of your smoker closed while cooking?
Yes, absolutely. You got to keep that lid closed to maintain a consistent temperature. And let the smoke circulate properly. And infuse the meat. If you open the lid, you're letting out heat and smoke. And you're going to increase the cooking time, and it might not turn out as well. It's all about maintaining a consistent cooking environment for even cooking and maximum smoke absorption. Every time that lid opens, it disrupts that.
Toby also gives some great old pro tips. One is add a pat of butter to the top of the steak right after you take it off the heat. Let it melt. It adds richness and flavor.
Yeah, that butter, it adds flavor, but it also gives the steak a nice sheen, and it just enhances that overall, deliciousness.
Another pro tip. If you want the best crust, sear it over an open flame. Toby loves a good char. And that direct heat from the flame will give you that crispy, flavorful exterior.
It's all about caramelization. That open flame provides really intense heat, which quickly caramelizes the sugars and proteins on the surface, and that's what gives you that great crust.
And the last tip. It's about resting again. Take the steak off the heat about 5 degrees below your target temperature to account for carryover cooking. It's all about hitting that perfect level of doneness.
Yeah, always be mindful of that carryover cooking. It doesn't just stop the second you take it off the heat. It keeps going for a bit.
Okay. Last but not least, I love this part of the article. Toby includes some reader feedback in the comments, which I always find helpful. It's interesting to see what other people are doing. So one commenter, Ola, who was grilling New York strips, suggested checking the internal temperature more frequently for thinner cuts because they cook faster during searing. Another commenter, let's say Sam, asked about adjusting cooking times for different weights of steak, and Toby clarified that it's more about the thickness, not necessarily the weight. Then there was Alex, who likes to cold smoke their steaks for a while before increasing the heat for the sear. And they say that with a good marbled steak, it never dries out. I like that people experiment and, adjust things based on their preferences and what they're working with.
Right. The feedback shows you that even though the basics are the same, there's room for personal preference. Like Ola's point about thinner steaks, always a good idea to keep an eye on things. And Alex's cold smoking method, it's another way to get that smoke flavor. Although Toby did mention earlier that smoking at low temperatures for too long can sometimes dry it out. So something to keep in mind.
And one more comment that I thought was really interesting, it's from Chris, who pointed out that perfect grill marks aren't the only sign of a good sear. Sometimes a more evenly seared surface can actually lead to better flavor and texture. And Toby agreed. He even suggested using the flat side of searing grates or a separate heat source to get that more even sear. So while those grill marks look cool, it's really the flavor and texture that matter most.
Yeah, I think Chris makes a good point. Because from a scientific standpoint, the way to get the most flavor development, through something called the Maillard reaction, it happens when a larger surface area is in contact with the heat. So grill marks look nice, but it's a small area.
So there you have it. A deep dive into smoking steak for truly exceptional results. And all thanks to Toby's article, the key takeaways. You want that smoky flavor at a lower temperature, then you sear it at high heat to get that crust and lock in the moisture. And never forget to rest. It makes a big difference in how tender and juicy it'll be.
I think what's great about Toby's article is it breaks down a process that can seem complicated into these clear steps. He explains the why behind each technique, the smoking, the searing, the resting, and when you understand that, you're empowered to try it yourself and get great results.
Exactly. And, think of it as a fun experiment. Try different smokers, different types of wood. See what you like best. Starting with salt and pepper is a great way to really showcase the flavor of the steak and the smoke. But, don't be afraid to try your own favorite seasonings. And again, that resting period, it's crucial if you want that melt-in-your-mouth experience.
And don't be limited by your equipment. Whether you have a fancy pellet smoker or a more traditional offset smoker, the principles are the same. Control the temperature. Get a good sear. That's what matters.
So go out there and try it. Experiment. Maybe smoke a different cut of steak. See what the difference is between oak and hickory smoke.
Right.
Make some of those delicious sides that we talked about. What are you most excited to try? What adventures are you going to go on?
Yeah.
And speaking of delicious food, don't forget Soggy Buns, your Maryland-based food truck and catering service. We have all sorts of tasty options. You might even find some perfectly smoked meats on the menu. You can visit our website, soggybuns.com. That's SOGGYDUNZ.com to see our full menu and find out where we'll be next.
I think this deep dive really shows you that even a simple dish can become something extraordinary when you understand the techniques, the heat, the smoke. It's not just cooking, it's about creating an experience with flavor.
Thank you for listening to the All Things Soggy Buns podcast.